Okay, good morning / afternoon ladies and gents, and welcome to another episode of Ding and the Quiz is Done. Today we're going to start our new unit on the Normans, but before we do that I'm going to give you a quick explanation on how we're going to do now quizzes and what equipment you're going to need to be able to do these lessons successfully. But before we do that, time for today's Today in History. So it's Sunday the 22nd of March, and that means that our Today in History is to do with Prohibition, the roughly 10-year period in which the sale of alcohol was banned in the United States. And on this day in 1933, the President put in a law allowing the sale of beer and wine, and this essentially was the law that began the end of Prohibition in the United States. So, do now quizzes. It wouldn't be one of my lessons without them, and we're still going to do them, but we are going to do them slightly differently. So what we're going to do is do them using Microsoft Forms. There is a link at the bottom of the page. I've also included it on ePraise. I want you to follow that link and then do the quiz. It's going to look like this. Please make sure that you fill it in accurately, particularly with the teachers, because, and it wouldn't be me without this, we're going to collect it all into a spreadsheet, and then I will use the information from that spreadsheet to inform any feedback I give and also the questions that I ask in the next episode. So, everyone should now pause and complete the quiz. Time's up. Let's get cracking. So, the point of today is to introduce you to the new unit on the Normans, introduce you to how we're going to do these lessons, and give you a little bit of background information that will help you answer your first exam question within this unit. So, first things first, what are you going to need to do all of these lessons successfully? First of all, you're going to need the pack. Now, I've either given you a printed version of this or you are using the digital version that's been attached to ePraise. If you can print it out, I suggest that you do so, but it's not the end of the world if you can't. You're also going to need something to write on, either your yellow book that you were given last week or a piece of paper, something that you can do your written answers on. And then, as always, you're going to need something to write with, Pegasus pen, of course, and your green pen to correct your answers. Right, so let's get started. So, our task for today is to explain the importance of English political history to the English monarchy in 1066, and the first thing that we need to do is find out what this course is all about. Now, you've already done Britain, Health and the People. That's your breadth study. It's a lot of history, a long period of time, but relatively shallow. This is the first one of your depth studies. So, short period of history, in this case only 34 years, but in a lot of depth. At the beginning of next year, we'll then do America 1840, 1895, and then we finish the course with conflict and tension in Asia, all three of our depth studies. And the aim of this study, when looking at the Normans, is to look at how Britain changed. So how it went from largely Anglo-Saxon to heavy Norman influences. And we're going to answer 4 key questions within this unit. So first of all, how the Normans invaded in the first place. Once they had invaded, how they gained and maintained control, because just being king doesn't mean that you're in control. How ordinary life in England changed after 1066, and then finally how much the church in England changed after 1066. Now, the course is these 36 years, or the unit is these 36 years, but actually before we do any of that, we need to get a little bit of context, and that requires us to look a little bit earlier than that at this guy, Edward the Confessor. Now, it's likely that you will remember either from the history course with us or from other history courses that you've done that Edward the Confessor died without a son, and that Edward the Confessor's death caused a huge number of problems. Now, the biggest mistake you can make here is going into this with the curse of knowledge and saying to yourself, well, I already know all of this, so I don't need to pay attention. This is GCSE, so we are going into it in a lot more depth than you would have done in Key Stage 3 or in Year 7. The other thing that we need to know is a little bit of geography. So when we talk about Scandinavia, we are talking about countries like Norway and Denmark that are to the north of England. And when we're talking about Normandy, Normandy was a dukedom of France, which is to the south of England. Now, in front of you on your packs, you will notice that you should now have a reading under the title England in the 11th Century. I'm going to explain a little bit about how we're going to do the readings. It would be exceptionally tempting for me to read them out. However, most of these aren't actually my original writing. They are extracts, adapted extracts from other historians. As a result, I don't want to read them out as I don't want to risk copyright issues. So what we're essentially going to do is we will pause the video, just like we did with the Do Now quiz, give you some time to read through the video, and then we'll go on to what we're going to do next. So you should pause the video now, read through the keywords first, and then do the reading. Okay. You now should have finished your reading. Make sure that you've read through it really, really carefully. It's better to spend more time on it. And now you need to turn to this diagram, which should be on the other side of the sheet, and spend some time filling that in. So again, pause the video and then we'll go through it together once you've filled it in. Okay, you now should have filled in your diagram on your own and we can go through it as a group. So there we go. Now you can see me highlighting as we're going along. We'll get the comically large highlighter. So with one of these diagrams, the best place to start is your end point, so the point at which all the arrows are leading towards, which is this bottom left-hand corner. And this is ultimately what we discussed before we started doing the reading, which is Edward the Confessor becoming king in 1942. And what we can then do is work backwards to figure out how Edward the Confessor became king. And in order to do that, you need to think about who would have been king had it not been for Edward the Confessor. Well, first of all, our most obvious option would be Edward's brother, Alfred. He couldn't have become king because he was murdered, and he was murdered by Harold Harefoot. Now, the reason he was murdered by Harold Harefoot is because there was this power struggle between Harold Harefoot and Harthcnut. And the reason there was a power struggle between Harthcnut and Harold Harefoot is because both of them wanted the throne, and their father, Cnut, had died in 1035. This then begs the question that if Alfred wasn't available for the throne and Harold Harefoot and Harthcnut both wanted the throne, then why wasn't that power struggle still going on in 1042? And that very simply is because they both died. Harold Harefoot in 1040 and then Harthcnut in 1042. So Harthcnut isn't available as a claimant, Harold Harefoot isn't available as a claimant, Alfred couldn't claim the throne because he'd been murdered. So we have 3 boxes now to work back to. So Harold Harefoot was murdered by Alfred was murdered by Harold Harefoot, but the only reason that he was able to be murdered by Harold Harefoot is because, where are we? He'd been captured by Earl Godwine, and the only reason why Earl Godwine was willing to capture Alfred and give him over to Harold Harefoot is because during the reign of Harold Harefoot's father and the first of the Danish kings, he'd become powerful. If Alfred regained the English throne, there was a really, really high chance that the Godwines would no longer be powerful. Okay, so we now have 2 options remaining, and both of these are the result of this option up here, which is Svein Forkbeard becoming King of England in 1013 and then Cnut becoming king shortly after. The reason why we have a dotted arrow here is because these events are not necessarily causal. Svein capturing England and becoming king and then Cnut becoming king does not lead to Cnut's death, but it's kind of the next event in that chain. So England is captured by the Danes, Cnut becomes king. One of the results of that is that Godwin becomes the Earl of Wessex. The other result being that Ethelred the Unready's sons were forced to flee to Normandy, which explains why when Alfred returns, Godwyn very, very quickly hands him over. Okay, so you now have one further activity to do, which I will put up on the visualizer, which is this spider diagram at the bottom. So have a think about the reading, have a think about the possible characters who are still alive, and have a think about who might have emerged as a possible claimant for the throne. You do not need names of specific people here, but what you do need is possible roles or individuals from different groups. And as we did before, pause the video, do it on your own, and then we'll go through it together. Okay, final step then, we're going to have a look at this spider diagram. So we're just going to switch back to my online version. So there are 4 possible options, 4 possible groups who could claim or could try and claim the English throne after Edward the Confessor's death. The first one are the Godwins. Now, they aren't necessarily from a family which has held power in the past, however, they're likely to base their claim on their huge amount of power within England and their ability to take the throne through force and then keep it. We then have the Danes. Even though Edward the Confessor was an Anglo-Saxon, it's possible that a Dane may return and use that line of kings from Svein and Canute to try and claim that they should be king. We might see a distant blood relative of Edward that bases their claim on being related to Edward and Ethelred the Unready. Just because Edward didn't have any sons doesn't mean that that royal line is completely ruled out. And then finally, we may see a Norman, and that Norman may base their claim on their close relationship with Edward, or the Normans' close relationship with Edward, and they may also place their claim on those blood relations and those blood ties with Normandy. Remember that Edward the Confessor's mother, where is she? Emma, I want to say. She stayed in England, but Alfred and Edward fled to live with her family when Spain invaded England. Right, so check that you've got them, correct them if you haven't. And that's it for today. Now, normally there would be a written task for you to complete that I would ask you to email to me or to your history teacher, but as this is an introduction, we don't have one. So if you want to take this a little bit further, if you want to revise it, section 1 of your knowledge organiser covers the same content that I've just gone through. If you want to read a little bit further, then I've included a link in the description, which is from BBC History, that talks about Edward the Confessor in a little bit more detail. And if you want to watch something that will take it a little bit further, then I've also included the link to a documentary from Tony Robinson. He plays Baldric in Blackadder, which looks at the relationship between Edward the Confessor and the Godwins. It's also important to note that so I'm going to try and mix up the way that we do lessons a little bit. I'm going to do 2 lessons a week that are like this kind of standard going through the booklet. On the 3rd lesson, we're going to be looking at what you would normally have done for homework. So knowledge organisers, re-quizzing and exam drills to make sure that your quiz booklets continue to fill up and that we don't get behind. During those sessions, I will also be running a live stream when 10B would normally have their lessons, so first thing on a Friday, unless I need to go into school, and I'll be using that as a kind of a live Q&A session for anybody who needs it, and to also go through some bits that have been picked up over the course of the week. But if you have any questions over the course of the week and you don't want to wait until Friday, then please do feel free to send me an email and I'll get back to you. Okay, thank you very much. See you later.